Greetings, respected guests, and welcome to the Washington Center for the Performing Arts. Today's event is not intended to be partisan in any way. Sponsors for this event include Oli Arts Magazine, Bowser's Books, the Northwest Playwrights Alliance, TC Media, and the Washington Center for the Performing Arts. Over the course of the day, a variety of readers from our local government and community will be reading 30 minutes of materials from the document known as the Mueller Report. Each reader has been asked to present the material without commentary, and transitions between speakers will be very brief. When a reader comes to a section of text that has been redacted, they will indicate so by ringing a bell. We hope you find this information useful and enjoyable.
Gates further stated that Deripaska wanted a visa to the United States, that Deripaska could believe that having Manafort in a position inside the campaign or administration might be helpful to Deripaska, and that Manafort's relationship with Trump could help Deripaska in other ways as well. Gates stated, however, that Manafort never told him anything specific about what, if anything, Manafort might be offering Deripaska. Gates also reported that Manafort instructed him in April 2016 or early May 2016 to send Kilimnik campaign internal polling data and other updates so that Kilimnik, in turn, could share it with Ukrainian oligarchs. Gates understood that the information would also be shared with Deripaska. Gates reported to the office that he did not know why Manafort wanted him to send polling information, but Gates thought it was a way to showcase Manafort's work, and Manafort wanted to open doors to jobs after the Trump campaign ended. Gates said that Manafort's instruction included sending internal polling data prepared for the Trump campaign by pollster Tony Fabrizio. Fabrizio had worked with Manafort for years and was brought into the campaign by Manafort. Gates stated that, in accordance with Manafort's instruction, he periodically sent Kilimnik polling data via WhatsApp. Gates then deleted the communication on a daily basis. Gates further told the office that after Manafort left the campaign in mid-August, Gates sent Kilimnik polling data less frequently, and that the data he sent was more publicly available information and less internal data. Gates' account about polling data is consistent with multiple emails that Kilimnik sent to U.S. associates and press contacts between late July and mid-August of 2016. These emails referenced internal polling, described the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's role in it, and assessed Trump's prospects for victory. Manafort did not acknowledge instructing Gates to send Kilimnik internal data. The office also obtained contemporaneous emails that shed light on the purpose of the communications with Deripaska and that are consistent with Gates' account. For example, in response to a July 7, 2016 email from a Ukrainian reporter about Manafort's failed Deripaska-backed investment, Manafort asked Kilimnik whether there had been any movement on this issue with our friend. Gates stated that our friend likely referred to Deripaska, and Manafort told the office that the issue and our biggest interest, as stated below, was a solution to the Deripaska-Pericles issue. Kilimnik replied, quote, "I am carefully optimistic on the question of our biggest interest. Our friend, Boyarkin, said there is lately significant more attention to the campaign in his boss's, Deripaska's, mind, and he will be most likely looking for ways to reach out to you pretty soon, understanding all the time sensitivity. I am more than sure that it will be resolved and that we will get back to the original relationship with V's boss," end quote, Deripaska. 8 minutes later, Manafort replied that Kilimnik should tell Boyarkin's boss, a reference to Deripaska, that if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate. Manafort has alleged to the office that he was willing to brief Deripaska only on public campaign matters and gave an example: why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. Manafort noted that if Trump won, Deripaska would want to use Manafort to advance whatever interest Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. section Roman numeral 3, Paul Manafort's 2 campaign period meetings with Konstantin Kilimnik in the United States. Manafort twice met with Kilimnik in person during the campaign period, once in May and again in August 2016. The first meeting took place on May 7, 2016, in New York City. In the days leading to the meeting, Kilimnik had been working to gather information about the political situation in Ukraine. That included information gleaned from a trip that former Party of Regions official Yuri Boyko had recently taken to Moscow, a trip that likely included meetings between Boyko and high-ranking Russian officials. Kilimnik then traveled to Washington, D.C. on or about May 5, 2016. While in Washington, Kilimnik had prearranged meetings with State Department employees. Late on the evening of May 6th, Gates arranged for Kilimnik to take a 3 a.m. train to meet Manafort in New York for breakfast on May 7th. According to Manafort, during the meeting, he and Kilimnik talked about events in Ukraine, and Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the Trump campaign, expecting Kilimnik to pass the information back to individuals in Ukraine and elsewhere. Manafort stated that opposition bloc members recognized Manafort's position on the campaign was an opportunity, but Kilimnik did not ask for anything. Kilimnik spoke about a plan of Boyko to boost election participation in the eastern zone of Ukraine, which was the base for the opposition bloc. Kilimnik returned to Washington, D.C. right after the meeting with Manafort. Manafort met with Kilimnik a second time at the Grand Havana Club in New York City on the evening of August 2, 2016. The events leading to the meeting are as follows. On July 28, 2016, Kilimnik flew from Kiev to Moscow. The next day, Kilimnik wrote to Manafort requesting that they meet, using coded language about a conversation he had that day. In an email with a subject line, "Black Caviar," Kilimnik wrote, quote, "I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you. He asked me to go and brief you on our conversation. I said I have to run it by you first, but in principle, I am prepared to do it. It has to do about the future of his country and is quite interesting," end quote. Manafort identified the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar as Yanukovych. He explained that in 2010, he and Yanukovych had lunch to celebrate the recent presidential election. Yanukovych gave Manafort a large jar of black caviar that was worth approximately $30,000 to $40,000. Manafort's identification of Yanukovych as the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar is consistent with Kilimnik being in Moscow, where Yanukovych resided. When Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy," and with a December 2016 email in which Kilimnik referred to Yanukovych as BG. Manafort replied to Kilimnik's July 29th email, "Tuesday, August 2nd, is best, Tuesday or Wednesday in NYC." 3 days later, on July 31st, 2016, Kilimnik flew back to Kiev from Moscow, and on that same day wrote to Manafort that he needed about 2 hours for their meeting because it is a long caviar story to tell. Kilimnik wrote that he would arrive at JFK on August 2nd at 7:30 p.m., and he and Manafort agreed to a late dinner that night. Documentary evidence, including flight, phone, and hotel records, and the timing of text messages exchanged, confirms the dinner took place as planned on August 2nd. As to the contents of the meeting itself, the accounts of Manafort and Gates, who arrived late to the dinner, differ in certain respects. But their versions of events, when assessed alongside available documentary evidence and what Kilimnik told business associate Sam Patton, indicate that at least 3 principal topics were discussed. First, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed a plan to resolve the ongoing political problems in Ukraine by creating an autonomous republic in its more industrialized eastern region of Donbass, and having Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president, ousted in 2014, elected to head that republic. That plan, Manafort later acknowledged, constituted a, quote, backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Manafort initially said that if he had not cut off the discussion, Kilimnik would have asked Manafort in the August 2nd meeting to convince Trump to come out in favor of the peace plan. And Yanukovych would have expected Manafort to use his connections in Europe and Ukraine to support the plan. Manafort also initially told the office that he had said to Kilimnik that the plan was crazy, that the discussion ended, and that he did not recall Kilimnik asking Manafort to reconsider the plan after their August 2nd meeting. Manafort said that he reacted negatively to Yanukovych sending, years later, an urgent request when Yanukovych needed him. When confronted with an email written by Kilimnik on or about December 8, 2016, however, Manafort acknowledged Kilimnik raised the peace plan again in that email. Manafort ultimately acknowledged Kilimnik also raised the peace plan in January and February 2017 meetings with Manafort. Second, Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election. That briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging and its internal polling data. According to Gates, it also included discussion of battleground states, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Manafort did not refer explicitly to battleground states in his telling of the August 2nd discussion. Third, according to Gates and what Kilimnik told Patton, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed two sets of financial disputes related to Manafort's previous work in the region. Those consisted of the unresolved Deripaska lawsuit and the funds that the opposition bloc owed to Manafort for his political consulting work, and how Manafort might be able to obtain payment. After the meeting, Gates and Manafort both stated that they left separately from Kilimnik because they knew the media was tracking Manafort and wanted to avoid media reporting on his connections to Kilimnik. C. Post-resignation activities. Manafort resigned from the Trump campaign in mid-August 2016, approximately 2 weeks after his second meeting with Kilimnik, amidst negative media reporting about his political consulting work for the pro-Russian Party of Regions in Ukraine. Despite his resignation, Manafort continued to offer advice to various campaign officials through the November election. Manafort told Gates that he still spoke with Kushner, Bannon, and candidate Trump, and some of those post-resignation contacts are documented in emails. For example, on October 21, 2016, Manafort sent Kushner an email and attached a strategy memorandum proposing that the campaign make the case against Clinton, quote, as the failed and corrupt champion of the establishment, and that, quote, WikiLeaks provides the Trump campaign the ability to make the case in a very credible way by using the words of Clinton, its campaign officials, and DNC members, end quote. Later, in a November 5, 2016 email to Kushner entitled Securing the Victory, Manafort stated that he was, quote, really feeling good about our prospects on Tuesday and focusing on preserving the victory, and that he was concerned the Clinton campaign would respond to a loss by, quote, moving immediately to discredit the Trump victory and claim voter fraud and cyber fraud, including the claim that the Russians have hacked into the voting machines and tampered with the results, end quote. Trump was elected president on November 8, 2016. Manafort told the office that, in the wake of Trump's victory, he was not interested in an administration job. Manafort instead preferred to stay on the outside and monetize his campaign position to generate business, given his familiarity and relationship with Trump and the incoming administration. Manafort appeared to follow that plan as he traveled to the Middle East, Cuba, South Korea, Japan, and China, and was paid to explain what a Trump presidency would entail. Manafort's activities in early 2017 included meetings relating to Ukraine and Russia. The first meeting, which took place in Madrid, Spain in January 2017, was with Georgy Oganov. Oganov, who had previously worked at the Russian embassy in the United States, was a senior executive at a Deripaska company and was believed to report directly to Deripaska. Manafort initially denied attending the meeting. When he later acknowledged it, he claimed that the meeting had been arranged by his lawyers and concerned only the Pericles lawsuit. Other evidence, however, provides reason to doubt Manafort's statement that the sole topic of the meeting was the Pericles lawsuit. In particular, text messages to Manafort from a number associated with Kalimnik suggest that Kalimnik and Boyarkin, not Manafort's counsel, had arranged the meeting between Manafort and Oganov. Kalimnik's message states that the meeting was supposed to be, quote, not about money or Pericles, but instead about recreating the old friendship, end quote, ostensibly between Manafort and Deripaska, and talking about global politics. Manafort also replied by text that he needs this finished before January 20th, which appears to be a reference to resolving Pericles before the inauguration. On January 15, 2017, 3 days after his return from Madrid, Manafort emailed K.T. McFarland, who was at that time designated to be Deputy National Security Advisor, and was formally appointed to that position on January 20, 2017. Manafort's January 15th email to McFarland stated, "I have some important information I want to share that I picked up on my travels over the last month." Manafort told the office that the email referred to an issue regarding Cuba, not Russia or Ukraine, and Manafort had traveled to Cuba in the past month. Either way, McFarland, who was advised by Flynn not to respond to the Manafort inquiry, appears not to have responded to Manafort. Manafort told the office that around the time of the presidential inauguration in January, he met with Kalimnik and Ukrainian oligarch Serhiy Lyovochkin at the Westin Hotel in Alexandria, Virginia. During this meeting, Kalimnik again discussed the Yanukovych peace plan that he had broached at the August 2nd meeting, and in a detailed December 8, 2016 message found in Kalimnik's DMP email account. In that December 8th email, which Manafort acknowledged having read, Kalimnik wrote, "All that is required to start the process is a very minor wink or slight push from DT," an apparent reference to President-elect Trump, "and a decision to authorize you to be a special representative and manage this process." Kalimnik assured Manafort with that authority he could start the process and within 10 days visit Russia. Yanukovych guarantees your reception at the very top level, and that DT could have peace in Ukraine basically within a few months after inauguration. As noted above, and statements to the office, Manafort sought to qualify his engagement on and support for the plan. On February 26, 2017, Manafort met Kalimnik in Madrid, where Kalimnik had flown from Moscow. In his first two interviews with the office, Manafort denied meeting with Kalimnik on his Madrid trip, and then, after being confronted with documentary evidence that Kalimnik was in Madrid at the same time as him, recognized that he met him in Madrid. Manafort said that Kalimnik had updated him on a criminal investigation into so-called black ledger payments to Manafort that was being conducted by Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Manafort remained in contact with Kalimnik throughout 2017 and into the spring of 2018. Those contacts included matters pertaining to the criminal charges brought by the office and the Ukraine peace plan. In early 2018, Manafort retained his longtime polling firm to craft a draft poll in Ukraine, sent the pollsters a 3-page primer on the plan sent by Kalimnik, and worked with Kalimnik to formulate the polling questions. The primer sent to the pollsters specifically called for the United States and President Trump to support the Autonomous Republic of Donbass, with Yanukovych as prime minister. And a series of questions in the draft poll asked for opinions on Yanukovych's role in resolving the conflict in Donbass. The poll was not solely about Donbass. It also sought participants' views on leaders apart from Yanukovych as they pertain to the 2019 Ukraine presidential election. The office has not uncovered evidence that Manafort brought the Ukraine peace plan to the attention of the Trump campaign or the Trump administration. Kilimnik continued his efforts to promote the peace plan to the executive branch, for example, U.S. Department of State, into the summer of 2018. B. Post-election and transition period contacts. Trump was elected president on November 8, 2016. Beginning immediately after the election, individuals connected to the Russian government started contacting officials on the Trump campaign and transition team through multiple channels, sometimes through Russian Ambassador Kislyak, and at other times through individuals who sought reliable contacts through U.S. persons not formally tied to the campaign or transition team. The most senior levels of the Russian government encouraged these efforts. The investigation did not establish that these efforts reflected or constituted coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia in its election interference activities. 1. Immediate post-election activity. As soon as news broke that Trump had been elected president, Russian government officials and prominent Russian businessmen began trying to make inroads into the new administration. They appeared not to have pre-existing contacts and struggled to connect with senior officials around the president-elect. As explained below, those efforts entailed both official contact through the Russian embassy in the United States and outreaches sanctioned at high levels of the Russian government through business rather than political contacts. A. Outreach from the Russian government. At approximately 3 a.m. on election night, Trump campaign press secretary Hope Hicks received a telephone call on her personal cell phone from a person who sounded foreign but was calling from a number with a DC area code. Although Hicks had a hard time understanding the person, she could make out the words, "Putin call." Hicks told the caller to send her an email. The following morning, on November 9th, 2016, Sergei Kuznetsov, an official at the Russian embassy to the United States, emailed Hicks from his Gmail address with the subject line, "Message from Putin." Attached to the email was a message from Putin in both English and Russian, which Kuznetsov asked Hicks to convey to the president-elect. In the message, Putin offered his congratulations to Trump for his electoral victory, stating he, quote, looked forward to working with Trump on leading Russian-American relations out of crisis, end quote. Hicks forwarded the email to Kushner asking, "Can you look into this? Don't want to get duped, but don't want to blow off Putin." Kushner stated in congressional testimony that he believed that it would be possible to verify the authenticity of the forwarded email through the Russian ambassador, whom Kushner had previously met in April 2016. Unable to recall the Russian ambassador's name, Kushner emailed Dmitry Simes of CNI, whom he had consulted previously about Russia on Volume 1, Section 4A4, Supra, and asked, "What is the name of Russian ambassador?" Kushner forwarded Simes's response, which identified Kislyak by name, to Hicks. After checking with Kushner to see what he had learned, Hicks conveyed Putin's letter to transition officials. 5 days later, on November 14th, 2016, Trump and Putin spoke by phone in the presence of transition team members, including incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. B. High-level encouragement of contacts through alternative channels. As Russian officials in the United States reached out to the president-elect and his team, a number of Russian individuals working in the private sector began their own efforts to make contact. Petr Avin, a Russian national who heads Alfa Bank, Russia's largest commercial bank, described to the office interactions with Putin during this time period that might account for the flurry of Russian activity. Avin told the office that he is one of approximately 50 wealthy Russian businessmen who regularly meet with Putin in the Kremlin. These 50 men are often referred to as oligarchs. Avin told the office that he met on a quarterly basis with Putin, including in the fourth quarter of 2016, shortly after the U.S. presidential election. Aven said that he took these meetings seriously and understood that any suggestions or critiques that Putin made during these meetings were implicit directives and that there would be consequences for Aven if he did not follow through. As was typical, the 2016 fourth quarter meeting with Putin was preceded by a preparatory meeting with Putin's chief of staff, Anton Vaino. According to Aven, at his fourth quarter 2016 one-on-one meeting with Putin raised the prospect that the United States would impose additional sanctions on Russian interests, including sanctions against Aven and/or Alfa Bank. Putin suggested that Aven needed to take steps to protect himself and Alfa Bank. Aven also testified that Putin spoke of the difficulty faced by the Russian government in getting in touch with the incoming Trump administration. According to Aven, Putin indicated that he did not know with whom formally to speak, and generally did not know the people around the president-elect. Aven told Putin he would take steps to protect himself and the Alfa Bank shareholders from potential sanctions, and one of those steps would be to try to reach out to the incoming administration to establish a line of communication. Aven described Putin responding with skepticism about Aven's prospect for success. According to Aven, although Putin did not expressly direct him to reach out to the Trump transition team, Aven understood that Putin expected him to try to respond to the concerns he had raised. Aven's efforts are described in Volume 1, Section 4b5, Infra. 2. Kirill Dmitriev's transition-era outreach to the incoming administration. Aven's description of his interactions with Putin is consistent with the behavior of Kirill Dmitriev, a Russian national who heads Russia's sovereign wealth fund and is closely connected to Putin. Dmitriev undertook efforts to meet members of the incoming Trump administration in the months after the election. Dmitriev asked a close business associate who worked for the United Arab Emirates Royal Court, George Nader, to introduce him to Trump transition officials, and Nader eventually arranged a meeting in the Seychelles between Dmitriev and Eric Prince, a Trump campaign supporter and an associate of Steve Bannon. In addition, the UAE National Security Advisor introduced Dmitriev to a hedge fund manager and friend of Jared Kushner, Rick Gerson, in late November 2016. In December 2016 and January 2017, Dmitriev and Gerson worked on a proposal for reconciliation between the United States and Russia, which Dmitriev implied he cleared through Putin. Gerson provided that proposal to Kushner before the inauguration, and Kushner later gave copies to Bannon and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. A background. Dmitriev is a Russian national who was appointed CEO of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, the Russian Direct Investment Fund, RDIF, when it was founded in 2011. Dmitriev reported directly to Putin and frequently referred to Putin as his, quote, boss. RDIF has co-invested in various projects with UAE sovereign wealth funds. Dmitriev regularly interacted with Nader, a senior advisor to UAE Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, Crown Prince Mohammed, in connection with RDIF's dealings with the UAE. Putin wanted Dmitriev to be in charge of both the financial and the political relationship between Russia and the Gulf states, in part because Dmitriev had been educated in the West and spoke English fluently. Nader considered Dmitriev to be Putin's interlocutor in the Gulf region and would relay Dmitriev's views directly to Crown Prince Mohammed. Nader developed contacts with both U.S. presidential campaigns during the 2016 election and kept Dmitriev abreast of his efforts to do so. According to Nader, Dmitriev said that his and the government of Russia's preference was for candidate Trump to win, and asked Nader to assist him in meeting members of the Trump campaign. Nader did not introduce Dmitriev to anyone associated with the Trump campaign before the election. Eric Prince is a businessman who had relationships with various individuals associated with the Trump campaign, including Steve Bannon, Donald Trump Jr., and Roger Stone. Prince did not have a formal role in the campaign, although he offered to host a fundraiser for Trump and sent unsolicited policy papers on issues such as foreign policy, trade, and Russian election interference to Bannon. After the election, Prince frequently visited transition offices at Trump Tower, primarily to meet with Bannon, but on occasion to meet Michael Flynn and others. Prince and Bannon would discuss, inter alia, foreign policy issues and Prince's recommendations regarding who should be appointed to fill key national security positions. Although Prince was not formally affiliated with the transition, Nader received assurances that the incoming administration considered Prince a trusted associate.